Thailand, ASEAN, and the European Union have similar education goals. One of them is to strengthen the national and regional higher education sector through the implementation of robust quality assurance mechanisms and qualification frameworks.
Through the SHARE program, the EU has been supporting ASEAN in promoting regional frameworks on quality assurance and qualification. And this support is in line with the ASEAN implementation of the ASEAN Blueprint, the Work Plan on Education, the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on Higher Education, and the Bangkok Declaration on promoting our global partnership for shared strategic goals.
The achievements of the SHARE project are an important example, where national authorities, members of higher education institutions, partner organizations, researchers and experts from both of the ASEAN and the European Union have been working tirelessly since 2015 to deliver outcomes that include the ASEAN Qualification Reference Framework and the ASEAN Quality Assurance Framework. With this, Simeo Raihead would like to congratulate SHARE and all stakeholders involved, and we wish to see this planted seed of quality grows and develop, and the project outcome continue to sustain in the region.
In the case of SHARE, this is supporting the ASEAN partners in their endeavors in order to create a regional higher education space. Thus, sharing good practices from Europe will only be relevant and accepted if they address the current situation of higher education in the ASEAN countries. In SHARE, the approach is based on a true partnership, and in Southeast Asia we collaborate with strong partners.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're really pleased to welcome you to this second in a series of policy dialogues where the SHARE program is running. My name is Darren McDermott. I didn't expect to be moderating today, but I'm very pleased to be here. Our panel for today is on innovations in credential recognition and portability for internationalization. And we have an excellent panel of expertise. Mr. Herman de Leeuw, who's the Executive Director of the Groningen Declaration Network. Ms. Jenneke Lokhoff, who's the Vice President of the ENIC Bureau, ENIC NARIC. Mr. Zhengwei Quaz, the CEO and co-founder of Accredify. And Mr. Simone Ravioli, who's the Director of Partnerships for Digitary. So I'd just like to give you a bit of an overview of SHARE. First, SHARE is the European Union support to higher education in the ASEAN region. It's been running since 2015. The main objective is to strengthen regional cooperation, enhance quality, competitiveness, and internationalization of ASEAN higher education systems, institutions, and thereby even contributing to an evolving ASEAN community. And SHARE enhances cooperation between ASEAN and the EU, and we're moving towards the harmonization of higher education across ASEAN. Next slide, please. So the consortium that runs SHARE is comprised of the British Council, which focuses on policy dialogues, the DAAD and ENQA, which both lead on qualifications frameworks and quality assurance. Credit transfer systems is currently led by British Council, and the student mobility and the SHARE scholarship specifically is led by NUFIC. So the objective of this policy dialogue is to look at how we can ensure scalability of SHARE activities and their ownership of ASEAN-based entities and institutions. We're looking at the challenge of COVID-19 and how to formulate effective adaptation strategies. We're looking at the risks and mitigation strategies within the current environment for the SHARE 2-year extension, and looking at the emerging developments and innovations in higher education. And that's the main focus of today's session. It's very much around innovations in credentials and portability for internationalization. We're also looking ahead to the long-term perspectives for the development of an ASEAN higher education space. So today, we hope to look at the potential and demonstrate the potential of digital solutions in the recognition of credentials and supporting the mobility of learners, looking at the conditions for a digital ecosystem supporting recognition and mobility of learners, and looking at the key stakeholders and drivers that can move this digital recognition of credentials forward in ASEAN. And our first presenter, or our first panelist, is, if I can just give a quick introduction to Ms. Jenneke Lokhoff. So Jenneke is the Senior Policy Officer at Nuffic, Netherlands, Vice President of ENIC NARIC. Within Dutch ENIC NARIC, she's the project lead for international recognition projects. Recently, she completed the DigiRec project, and that resulted in a white paper for ENIC NARIC networks on the connection between digitalization of student data. Jenneke currently serves as Vice President-elect of ENIC NARIC networks, and I'd like to hand over to Jenneke now to present. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Darren, and also your SHARE colleagues for the invitation to join this policy dialogue. It's usually better to meet in person, but in this case, a virtual meeting is actually very fitting for the topic of digitization and innovation. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss these important topics with you, the colleagues here in the panel, and also hopefully the audience. As agreed, my opening intervention will be a more practical one from the European region and based on the experiences of a project called DigiRec that focused on digital data. We as Nuffic coordinated this project together with centers in the ENIC NARIC network, as well as the Groningen Declaration network and MREX. Next slide, please. What I will do is focus first on the context in which the paper was developed. And SHARE is drawing on the experience of the Bologna process, and therefore it may also be useful for further discussion to have a basic understanding in which the context of the project was undertaken. Next, I will speak briefly on the potential of digital student data for recognition, the DigiRec project and the white paper it produced, and I will close with some observations and conclusions. Next slide, please. So before we dive into the digitization, a few words on the context in which the DigiRec project was undertaken. As said, it was developed by the ENIC NARIC networks. And these are two networks consisting of in total 57 national information centers on recognition. They now exist 25 years, that's the ENIC network, and 35 years for the NARIC network. The NARIC network is established by European Commission, and the ENIC network by UNESCO and the Council of Europe. And as you can see, all NARICs from the map, all NARICs are ENICs, but not all ENICs are NARICs. So there are 57 ENICs. And you will also see there's some overlap with the Asia Pacific region, as Australia and New Zealand are also part of the network. And in practice, so there are two networks, but in practice, they work very closely together. Now, important is that the ENIC NARIC network has a task under the Lisbon Recognition Convention, which is the international binding treaty on recognition that lays down the principles for fair recognition. And the ENIC NARIC network has a task to implement the convention, the centers, and also to share information with each other. Now, one way in which the networks also collaborate is in projects, for example, through the European Union Erasmus Plus program. And the DigiRec project, about which I will tell more, is funded by this within this framework. Now, very briefly, for a comprehensive understanding of the European recognition infrastructure and how this project came together, The three pillars for recognition in the European region are the INIC-NARIC networks, which give an operational structure for collaboration. There's the Lisbon Recognition Convention from UNESCO and the Council of Europe, which lays down the principles for fair recognition. So that's the legal framework. And then there is the political process, that's the Bologna process, which has been pushing for and resulting in the development of transparency instruments and such. Now, the Asia-Pacific region actually has two equivalents very shortly. Recently, the Tokyo Convention came into force and also established the APNIC network, that's APNNIC, consisting of 6 countries. So that would be the equivalent of the INIC-NARIC networks. Now, so far for the context, next slide, please. For the context to give an understanding where the ideas in my intervention are coming from. Let's turn to the topic of discussion now, digitization. As you may have experienced yourself, the digitization of student information is becoming more and more widespread. And if you did not experience it at your desk, you may have been told this is the case, and it is the case. You see now digitized personal data, digital transcripts, even digital diplomas, and many other examples where information is digitized. And the expectation is this will only be more in the future. The shift from paper towards digitized data, and as a consequence, the digitization of the recognition process itself, has potentially enormous benefits for the recognition of foreign qualifications. And I will here just name a few. There's the security aspect, because digital credentials may be more difficult to alter than paper. There's the part where digital procedures can save time over paper-based procedures, which is beneficial for the admission process. And in relation to times like these, where it's difficult to access paper because offices are closed, a digitized process allows for flexibility to when and where operations are conducted. So these are only a few examples to illustrate the potential benefits for recognition. There are many other benefits in terms of speed, consistency of recognition decisions, data control, the environment, and so forth. However, while there are many potential benefits, there are also challenges. For example, that dealing with digital student data may cost actually more time because they come in very different formats and credential evaluators have to figure out how to verify these. It may also lead to questions such as how to digitize your processes in a way that it actually supports recognition, and ultimately to the question how to fully reap the benefits from digitization so it truly benefits recognition. It is because of these type of questions that a group of INIC-NARICs, together with the Groningen Declaration Network and MRECs, undertook the DigiRec project 2 years ago. The project was co-financed by the Erasmus Plus project program from the European Commission. And the Groningen Declaration Network, that's also part of this panel, was actually one of the partners. So DigiRec, for the first time, systematically analyzed the relation between digitization of student data and recognition. Next slide, please. The result is a white paper that was published 6 weeks ago, and you see here the cover. The paper intends to support INIC-NARICs to develop policies and strategies for the ongoing digitization, but in fact, it is useful for anyone working in admissions, and as I was rereading, also useful for outside of the INIC-NARIC networks. It would be too much to present the whole report to you here right now, but I can give you a bird's view of the content. The leading question of the publication was, how can the digitization of student data and credential evaluation support smooth recognition in line with the Lisbon Recognition Convention? And to answer this question, the publication is divided into 3 parts. Next slide, please. So here you see the table of contents, and the 3 parts consist of an introduction that provides the context and includes general considerations for digitization, such as what do we mean with digitization, and what are some benefits and challenges of digitization? Next, digitization in the credential evaluation process. And this is the most substantial part of the publication and starts with a chapter to introduce the concepts of data, technology, and standards. The next 3 chapters look at the life cycle of the credential evaluation process. So it looks at the input, what type of data are received. Then to the throughput, which focuses on the evaluation process itself and the possibilities that digital solutions offer to process the data and digitize processes, recognition processes in line with the Lisbon Recognition Convention. And the third part is, or the fourth part, is the output part, which focuses on digital solutions to communicate your recognition decisions to the applicant. So it's the full cycle, input, throughput, output. And then the last part consists of recommendations, both on the level of INIC centers as on the network's level. So the collaboration of all the centers together. And I will come back to these conclusions in a minute. Now, if you're interested, the report is freely available and the link is included in the presentation that will be made available after the dialogue. So next slide, please. I'll be closing with some observations and conclusions from the report that may be helpful for the discussion. So as mentioned at the start, digitization itself will, yes, thank you. So as mentioned at the start, digitization itself will not solve recognition problems. And in some scenarios, it might even be an obstacle to mobility if data cannot read. So there is a need for collaboration here. There's also a level of standardization needed to make it an inclusive system. Most benefits will be there for recognition when a high level of data maturity is reached. So low levels of data maturity are, for example, pictures and images, and a high level is machine readable data. So in the latter, it will allow for more innovations and more automatization. Another observation is to include all actors to develop something that works in practice. This is really important, and that's why I included this example. I hope it's readable, but it shows when we were developing the project and developing the paper that a technical person doubted whether the practice of actually printing data because it was difficult to otherwise process them happened, and a credential evaluator says, yes, this happens if, in some cases, if, for example, there's not enough familiarity with the type of data received. And this is also a very clear example how data itself not automatically lead to faster recognition. So when something is developed, it's really important that all sides work together. So practitioners, policy persons, and also people that can provide the technical expertise to develop solutions. Next slide, please. Now, some more recommendation on a lower level are to look at the quick wins, so start small. Also look if your national legislation actually allows for handling digital credentials. In some legal frameworks, it's stipulated that you have to evaluate paper-based credentials. So this is something to look for if you're going to digitize. Also to start a dialogue with trusted sources to make available the data they have. And in Herman will probably have a few may have some examples for this. And also start to reserve funds for the upcoming digitization, because it's going to happen. And then the last one is for the INIC really on the level of the INIC offices, but actually applies for any competent authority. And this is that when you're choosing a database, make sure that it complies with international and national regulations, and also design it such that it supports your convention. So in the European region, that would be the Lisbon Recognition Convention. So thank you. This was my contribution for now, and I look forward to discuss this further. And I here give the floor back to Darren. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janneke. That's it's fascinating and really fresh research there that we can all look into. Really looking forward to the discussion later. I'd now like to introduce Mr. Herman de Leeuw, who is the Executive Director of the Groningen Declaration Network. Those of you from the Netherlands, please forgive my pronunciation. It's something I'm still working on. Herman, as I said, is the Executive Director of the Groningen Declaration Network, and he started out his career as a bibliographer of Islamic manuscripts, where he hit on the importance of authorizations and the authenticity of documents. So this focus on authenticity carried over into the next step of his career at Nuffic, where he advocated the need for document examination when dealing with education credentials. Moving to DUO, the education executive agency of the Netherlands MOE, where he witnessed the transition from physical documents to digital data, he found that origin, authenticity, authorization, and access mattered just as much in the digital age as they did in the manuscript age. And these lie at the basis of the Groningen Declaration Network. So over to you, Herman. I'm very pleased to have you here today.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Darren. And I would like to say for those that speak a bit Malay, Salamat Malam. I worked in 1990-1991 in Kuala Lumpur, and I have this interest in the Indonesian and Malaysian context. I retained that for 30 years. The Groningen Declaration in a nutshell basically deals with the realization that now that we have digital data that capture student data in many countries, and I will name them in my presentation, why is it that we don't use them as a human capital currency, just the way we did with physical currency? We can all work online with our bank accounts, transferring money, accepting money as it comes in, flows out. We could do the same thing with our own brains, with our education and learning. This is what the Groningen Declaration basically tries to convey. So next slide, please. We were created in 2012 in the Netherlands, actually within the Netherlands funding agency, DUO, which takes care of financing primary education, secondary education, and tertiary education, students, pupils, teachers, and the physical environment. And since 1986, DUO has made it possible to capture data on students digitally, leading to a total coverage of student progress throughout Dutch education since 1996. And we made these data available to the students since 2012 using a national digital authentication system, which was basically the beginning of the Groningen Declaration. The network, founded in the Netherlands, now has 106 actually signatories from 28 countries. We have a board of directors representing every continent and private sector as well as the public sector. I happen to be the executive director and also the founder of the Groningen Declaration. We have our annual convening each spring, rotating continents, and we would have had our conference this year in New Delhi, India, if it weren't for the coronavirus, which basically meant that we had to stop this. We deal basically with supporting global mobility initiatives worldwide. And we have reached out to UNESCO, the World Bank, Education, ENIC, NARIX, a lot of entities around the globe. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In the conviction that we can only make this ecosystem work if we integrate as many different various stakeholders as possible. What we want our participants to do is to give their commitment to learner privacy and data protection, which would always reign supreme. Also to provide transparency and responsibility on how they maintain the data and how they give access to the students, And one very important issue which also hits on today's discussion, the recognition of digital student data and qualifications. This is a two-sided issue. On the one hand, we want to make sure that people say what comes into us digitally is per definition authentic, and we shouldn't have any questions. But then next, of course, you want the qualifications to be recognized for what they represent. This is what the Enigmatic network does. So we don't deal with the recognition of the qualifications per se, but we want to see to it that people accept the digital data as they come in. And we aim to ensure that all citizens around the globe have access to their secure digital records. And we think the best way to make our vision happen is to support initiatives dealing with migrant data mobility. Think of refugees even, which have played a significant role in our network. And we also, in line with what I just said, we also seek to bring in resources to address a lack and imbalance of global data and digital capacity. We are very much aware of the risk of a digital divide, and we think now is the time to see to it that the digital divide doesn't come to life in the digital learner data ecosystem. Next slide, please. The way we operationalize our goals, basically, and since we are a foundation with limited budget, we have an annual convention bringing together the international community. Last time we had our event in Puebla, Mexico, we had 160, and we like to believe that we can reach 200, 250 soon. Our events focus on best practice sharing, on credential digitalization, credential evaluation, social use cases for international depositories. Depositories are the likes of the National Student Clearinghouse in the USA, for instance, the National Learner Records databases of South Africa, SAQA, China's China Higher Education Student Information Career Centers, which basically hosts data on all pupils in the whole of China, and an accretion of 100 million student data each year, which is really very impressive. And we also want to create new pilots. We were instrumental in advocating the establishment of the African Qualification Verification Network, AQVN. In Australia and New Zealand, we gave the inspiration for the development of My Equals, which is now poised to become a regional hub, making possible the incoming and outgoing mobility of students from Australia and New Zealand, welcoming Chinese, Indian, American, Canadian, etc. students simply using their digital data. And we want our participants to be involved in advocating all of this. We have a regional strategy to drive awareness, and actually at the time of speaking we are about to establish a regional Australia-New Zealand chapter, which may want to link up with the Asian region soon. Next slide, please. This is the ultimate goal. Think of the ecosystem that uses digital credentials as one that looks into who is providing data, who is awarding the data. It is not always the school, it may be an examination body, who quality assures the data, who is evaluating the data, which is the work of the Enigmatic network, and in what way can we verify the accuracy of the data. And in the middle you find the global learner. We have we strongly believe that all of this centers around the global learner, and that privacy is key in the whole discussion. Next slide, please. And I would like to end with this one here, the global challenge, funding and bridging digital capabilities worldwide. Like we said before, this is not just a concern to the developed world, to North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand. We really are keen to see to it that the potential of digital credentials benefits learners from all over the world for their lifetime. So please join us, and I would be happy to take questions after I'm done. And that would be all for now for me.
Thank you very much, Herman. And hopefully we can have the next GDN conference in ASEAN. So sometime next year, but yeah.
Well, we welcome bids. Like I told you and others before, at next year's conference in Canada, at Ottawa, ideally we are open to receive bids coming from, well, for instance, Singapore, Indonesia, whatever, but from any part of the world. So if you think this is an opportunity that we would not want to miss out on, please consider bringing out a bid, and I would be more than happy to consult with you. So please share our contact details also at the end of this session.
Great. Okay. Thanks again. I'll now turn to Mr. Zhengwei Kwa. Zhengwei is the CEO and co-founder of Accredify, which provides a turnkey certification solution for education institutes. They're working on a nationwide initiative to put Singapore's education credentials on the blockchain. And I'll allow Zhengwei explain that in more detail. Zhengwei is also a permanent guest lecturer at the Singapore Management University with a focus on blockchain and the Internet of Things. Zhengwei, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Darren, for the opportunity to be here. For today, I'll be sharing a little bit more specifically on an initiative that we have in Singapore, as well as the Netherlands. So I'll just get started. This was more of a private and public collaboration. So we had stakeholders from the public sector, as well as the private sector. It is between Singapore and Netherlands, and this was brought about by the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, and they actually came up with a set of problem statements, of which recognizing of credentials is one of them. And on the public side, we have, for example, GovTech Singapore, we have the Ministry of Education from Netherlands, as well as Duo, which is where Herman was from previously. On the private side, we have from Singapore Accredify, which ourselves, we have NUS on board, and then on the Netherlands side, we have TU Delft, we have the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, as well as Rabobank. So as you can see, this was a collaboration between the public and the private sector. A little bit of where we are today. So the whole project started in September 2019. That was when we came together to identify certain things, like the challenges involved, who are the potential stakeholders that we may want to engage, as well as the outcomes that we want to achieve. And then in October, we started to develop a little bit more on the plan itself. So that was when a few of us came together for knowledge sharing, there we really go and engage the stakeholders, and also to kind of have a talk about what are the expectations. And then in November, which is the most exciting one, the Dutch group actually came over to Singapore as a mission. And that is when we went deep into discussion. So we break out into the different problem statements. And then we just started discussing whatever that we planned in the past, such as the challenges, who do we want on board, and what are the outcomes that we want. So we even had a deals over dinner, which is a very interesting concept where we had dinner at a restaurant, and we just started talking casually between each other. It was like a round robin kind of model where we jump around and meet different people, and several deals were signed on the spot. So between November and today, actually, we've been working on the details and also coming up with pilot programs and doing actual implementation of the tech itself. So for this, I will go a little bit deeper later on. And then we were planned to be sharing what we have done in June in Amsterdam during the TNW conference but due to the situation, that has been delayed. So this trip to Netherlands was meant for us to showcase the progress so far, as well as to spread the word wider. Couple of photos to kind of commemorate. This was Deals of a Table. You had people from Rabobank, from Duo, from GovTech, etc. And then this was when they were now out of office to have a deeper discussion. This is the tech team specifically. And then we went on to Rabobank's office as well to really understand, how can we extend credentials beyond higher education to the employment world as well. So I'm going to give you an overview of what happened post our discussion in November and how we structured what we intend to do. So the problem statement that we found, there was still a high barrier to student mobility. And our objective for this particular project is to connect the Netherlands and the Singapore education system and potentially extend it to the employment system as well. So the idea, we will look at a decentralized credentials verification system utilizing the blockchain technology. So we are not talking about creating silos of databases, but more on a common standard where everybody abide to, and we can all point to that decentralized network to verify each other's credentials. I'll go a little bit deeper in how it works technically speaking. So a school, could be any school, will generate a certificate, and that certificate go through a process that we call hashing. And that is the process of recovering a fingerprint that is unique to the certificate. And then what we do with that fingerprint, we put it up across 7,000 computers worldwide to secure it. And later on, whomever wishes to verify the content of the certificate, simply generate the fingerprint again and compare it onto the blockchain. As long as the fingerprint hasn't been changed, we can rely on the content of the cert. Right, so the fundamental theory of it is very simple, putting up onto a decentralized network that anybody can compare to. But at the same time, we are protecting the privacy data because only the fingerprint is on top. None of the data that is readable is going to be in the public. So with that, we came up with two specific use cases because time is short, and although we have grand plans, we need to kind of scope them out. The first one being student exchange program. So ideally, we want students all over Netherlands and all over Singapore to have all sorts of cross recognition, but that is tough to execute. So we scope it to a very small scope where we're looking at least one student from Singapore to Netherlands and one student from Netherlands to Singapore who is on an exchange program, right? Exchange programs are generally shorter, and that allow us to quickly iterate and to make changes as and when we need. But if we are able to prove that a credential post-exchange can be sent back from the host to the home country, that process itself then can be expanded to maybe a faculty, an entire school, and potentially nationwide. So very interestingly, we had a very focused goal and objective. In the past, it could take up to 2 months, up to 3 months for a student to retrieve his credits after the exchange, just an exchange program. How can we reduce that to mere hours, minutes, or even seconds? So that was our goal. And the second side is really about streamlining the process of getting employment, right? For example, today, if you are a graduate in Netherlands and you are hired by Rabobank to come and work in Singapore, the process itself is a huge pain. All the way from the collation of all your credentials, getting them translated, getting them certified true copy, the entire process could take months, hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And again, how? By using a mutually recognized credential system, can we allow anybody from Netherlands, a graduate, to come to Singapore to work without having to go through the entire process again? So again, shortening the hours needed, shortening the cost that we need. So that's the second use case. From a process flow point of view, it's pretty simple. Everything is digitalized. automated, and secure. We always start from the school. They pass us the data. We will generate the verifiable documents on an open standard. In Singapore, we use open certs, but we are agnostic. So we can use W3C verifiable credentials, for example. We can also use block certs from the US, etc., etc. Then, for the Netherlands use case in particular, it goes into the Career Wallet. Career Wallet is an open source project started by Rabobank for students to collect all the credentials in one spot and do one-click application to the different locations. For example, with the employers, with another higher education, or with foreign immigration. The concept is pretty simple. Once you receive an e-cert from us, you can simply take that e-cert, go to the school's website, do a drag and drop or upload, and immediately the cert will come out with two things. It will show that it is verified, and therefore the cert will be displayed. And the verification process has three parts. First, to check on the tamper-proofness. So it is about the fingerprint comparison that I told you about previously, how we can ensure that the data hasn't been tampered, and therefore we can rely on the data. Next is what we call an issuance check. So every school that issues a cert will have a unique certificate store on the blockchain, which is protected by their private key. So only the school can issue that cert from their certificate store, right? So we check the issuance. And lastly, something interesting, because it's on the blockchain with smart contract, we can actually revoke a cert or to set an expiry date. And because of that, we have to check that the cert is still valid. This is opposed to in the past when, for example, once you give the cert to a student, you can never take it back again. He or she can just use it forever. And then on the Career Wallet side is really to help you stay in control. So it's both secure and independent, and keep all your documents inside the phone itself. And data is only shared based on who you want to share to, as well as what you want to share. And you have a full transaction history inside to let you know that what has been shared. Again, this is an open source project by Rabobank. If you're interested, I'm more than happy to connect you. So that's all for my sharing today between the project with Netherlands and Singapore. If you're interested to know more, feel free to get connected. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you very much, Zheng Wei. That's fascinating. Can I just confirm? It's pretty much every Singaporean institution is using your service now. Is that correct?
Most of them, because in Singapore, the Ministry of Education has been quite active in promoting this. And so what we call the Institute of Higher Learnings are mandated to use this system. But of course, we also focus on getting the private education institutes to get on board, because it's a pure network effect. With more people using the same credentials, the system is getting more and more powerful.
Absolutely. Okay, fascinating, and look forward to the discussion later. Okay, so I'd now like to go to our final panelist for today. Mr. Simone Ravaioli is Director of Strategic Partnerships at Digitary. He chaired the EAIE, or the European Association of International Education, Digital Student Data Portability Task Force between 2010 and 2014. This initiative, which seeded the creation of the Groningen Declaration Network. For his role, for this role, he was presented with the EAIE Rising Star Award, and he's a member of the ESCO Maintenance Committee, the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum, the advisory board of the Open Recognition Alliance, as well as the steering committee of the PESC Competencies and Credentials User Group. In 2019, Simone is the recipient of the PESC Distinguished Service Award for his long-standing contribution to interoperability in global student mobility. In 2020, he's elected to the Admissions and Recognition Steering Group of the EAIE and takes on the role of the chair of the IEEE Interoperable Learning Record Work Group. Thank you very much, Simone, and very pleased to have you here.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, everyone. Yes, I am passionate about this particular work, and with Digitary, I've been able to collaborate in many projects at global scale. And some of the things that I'd like to share with you today are exactly that. Give you a sense of what Digitary does, and also how we are on a mission to connect the dots and support global student mobility. So next slide, please. Digitary has been really focusing on supporting global student mobility since 2005, since its findings. And it made a strategic choice at the very beginning, which was not as popular or easy to support back then, which was to really focus on being learner-centric from the beginning. That was before any privacy regulation hit the market, or before technology was really where it is today. So very user-friendly, providing seamless experiences. But that was a bet that we made, and then proved to be successful down the road. So we have been in the business of issuing digital credentials since the very beginning, and particularly focusing on higher education. And to this date, we're proudly issuing several millions of credentials, and our users are verifying these credentials globally across hundreds of countries. Next slide, please. As a company, we grew out of Dublin and in Europe, so we are very much Eurocentric, but we've had opportunity to expand globally, particularly in Asia. And so at the moment, we have two main offices, one still in Dublin, our funding headquarters, and one growing in Melbourne. Those are the two poles. And as you look at the map, they really connect across the ASEAN region. And so it makes sense for us to be involved and to provide support also to anything that is in between Europe and Asia at this stage. Although our remit and our work is really also ventured into other regions like North America, for example. We have mostly been looking at providing support for big scale projects that are addressing and having an impact at national or across national level. I'd like to mention one particularly, which has been referenced before by Herman, and it is the MyEqual project. So MyEquals is essentially a digital credentials platform that all public universities across Australia and New Zealand are using to issue their academic documents. That is a project that we are proudly powering, meaning that the technology is Digitary technologies, and that is what helped us also extend our footprint and support a wider spectrum of users. We've also worked on different integrations with other partners, Chezing in China being one that is probably known to the crowd of recognition professionals, but also we do work on technical integration with admission platforms and the likes. To some extent, our approach to connecting the dots is through interoperability. Next slides, please. As much as we started as a platform that the university would use to issue their credentials, we increasingly started to focus on following how those digital documents, how those transcripts were being used by the recipients, by the learners. And that really put us on a different journey where we realized that the graduation point is not the end of the academic experience, but it's really just the start of a different journey, a lifelong learning one. And that's been really what I think is more relevant for this particular conversation around recognition. Next slides, please. The service that we wanted to focus on today is really what we call verified international applicants, and it's making sure that users have an ability, have the superpowers to use those digital documents for different purpose, but particularly to be continuing their lifelong learning journey when it comes to international admissions. And so some of the benefits here are to fast track that recognition turnaround times, admissions, being able to provide digital documents that are verified, but also the data inside, which is really key to enable further integrations and more streamlined processes. And very importantly, the collaboration with credential evaluation agencies, the ENIC networks, but any recognition professional really that plays in the market. Next slide, please. I'm thinking that mobility, as an angle through which we should look at it, which is that what's happening right now, the pandemic we're living through, we really provide an opportunity to benefit mobility. I know this is a sort of a different statements than what we're seeing today, but when it comes to innovating in the recognition space, this is an opportunity. The concept of exponential technologies, bring about opportunities thanks to the convergence of a number of different elements that I'd like to share a bit more about. But when it comes to really supporting mobility, there are three key elements that I want to share with you. One is data, the other one is standards, and the third one is networks. Next slide, please. When we talk about digitalization, we often refer to just moving from paper to digital, but as also the DigiRec project points out, that's no longer enough. And so we need to go from digital documents to digital data. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot taken from our platform where you could see that you really have the ability to maintain that look and feel of a document, a digital representation of what you would have in paper form, but it is carrying data inside. And this data should be based really on standards. Next slide. To give you a sense of how diverse and exciting and to say challenging the standards landscape is globally, here is a few popular specifications that all contribute to support global student interoperability. These standards need to be open and they need to be adopted. There are clearly drivers of these particular initiatives. North America has a lot of movers and shakers in the space, so they have been doing a lot of work, but certainly Europe, even recently producing the new Europe as Digital Credential Infrastructure, is very much committed to solving mobility through the use of open standards. Next slide, please. Now, standards then need to be adopted and need to be used to connect networks. And in the past several years, efforts to build networks, whether they're regionals or global, have been successful. You may be familiar with the MREX project and the Erasmus Without Papers. Those are two distinct initiatives in Europe that were really, I'd say, fostered and supported also by the wider remit of the GDN, which Herman talked about, and that as Digital we've been proudly been supporting. But outside of Europe, in North America, networks like EdXchange, these are infrastructure to share, to exchange data. So transport mechanisms so that data can fly from the home university to the host university, for example, when you need to exchange a transcript. Different players have different roles in this particular space. One that I'll mention, I grade out here in the end, is a similar initiative, an effort addressing the development of a national network in Canada that was also inspired by the Groningen Declaration network is in the making. So the trick here is to really connect these networks. Next slide, please. I wanted to offer you a visual that could be branded Groningen Declaration Network. This is just pointing out on the map where existing data depositories are already in the world. Some of these are also connected to networks, and it would be very nice to see an update of this map with an ASEAN repository or network there. And I believe that the SHARE project, at least, looking forward to the future work, hopefully we'll have a chance to really make a mark on this map. And as Digitary, we are incredibly excited to be able to support SHARE by providing an evaluation of some of the of a couple of the current credit transfer systems that exist in the region and make available our expertise to work on these matters on a global scale and support the project. Next slide. So as much as we were born in Europe, are extensively doing work and providing support in Asia, our scope is really global. And our network is based on our direct, the university that we serve directly, but also extended by our partners. And as I said, credential evaluation agencies here are key partners when it comes to the recognition space. And it is important that this is done by integrating with the existing networks, whether they're data exchange hubs or just routing architectures, and that is leveraging open standards. Next slide. Now, this is probably the most important item that I wanted to share. It is supported on the seminal piece of research that NAFIC conducted recently in the DigiRec project, and is really, I guess, the core of, I believe, innovating in the recognition space globally. Next slide, please. So if you look at the recognition space and digital credential space, you could safely argue that recognition statements are de facto digital credentials. More and more, the statements are issued as digital documents. More and more, they're issued leveraging state-of-the-art technologies, and more these documents contain data. Now, I believe we are at a unique convergence point where exponential technologies like blockchains or digital credentials technologies are really pairing up with major political innovation in the space. And so if we just go through the stack, I believe that the UNESCO Global Recognition Convention provides that political overarching scaffolding, for technology to be able to play its role. And the Global Recognition Convention explicitly mentioned technologies and point at digital technologies, as enabler of this big vision. So it is a unique case where the policies are really ahead. And it turns out that technology is exactly there, waiting to be implemented, to be that enabler for those policies to really come to practice. But it's practice that is still a bit behind. So the ideas of automatic recognition, for example, or portability of recognition in some countries or regions, will still be looked at as utopian or dystopian for some practitioners, and that must be said. But I believe that is exactly the moonshot. That is the challenge that we as Digitary, at least, would like to solicit global contributions, because it is an opportunity that we can really leverage to innovate in the recognition space. This is happening only if we strike and engage with some strategic partnerships, across different organizations, and those are individual universities, those are vendors like Accredify and Digitary, or the credential evaluation agencies of the world, as well as the ministries and all the other political stakeholders. So again, portability of recognition is possible, and I believe it is where most of our efforts should be geared toward, and certainly something that I'm going to bring into the EAI steering group for the admission and recognition, where I'm happy and fortunate to be involved in the next few years. Next slide. I'd like to conclude going back to this idea of learner centricity, which Digitary started with, and where I started from with my presentation, because we are really experiencing, I guess, an explosion of attention toward the learner. Privacy regulations like GDPR, or scandals in the world around loss of privacy, are pointing at this further increased need for data ownership and learner consent. I think the idea of learner centricity doesn't do justice to this. I think we should move in looking at it as a gravitas, where the learner is really in the middle. Next slide, please. And what that means that, we need to have learner records, as we said, that should be comprehensive, meaning that they can represent any kind of learning that happens in the lifelong journey, whether it's the formal academic one or the informal vocational one. But also these records should be interoperable. They should be based on open standards. But the learners in the middle means that if I am applying to a university, for example, to use a real case, and I have in my digital wallet either my digital transcript or my digital recognition statement, I have the agency to share that with an admission officer, and that admission officer should be able to accept it when it comes from me. Now, there is a lot of self-sovereign identity washing out there, meaning that we may be working on technologies that allow learner centricity or ownership, but then we don't necessarily trust a document that comes from the users, from the learners themselves. We'd rather have it come from the organization, whether it's the other university, whether it is a credential evaluation agency. So I think we need to just slightly switch more on really empowering the learners as technology allows and as policy says. So with that, I'd like to stop here. Thank you, and give back the mic to Darren.
Many thanks, Simone. It's really comprehensive, and you're also doing some work with the SHARE program. Okay. Great. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Herman, and Herman will lead a discussion with the panel. So initially, we'll have some questions from Herman, and then we'd like to go to questions from the audience. And there's some really good questions coming in, so please keep them coming.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the Simone's presentation resonated with me a lot, and also Zheng Wei's and Jenneke's presentation. Speaking of Simone's presentation, the portability of recognition really is the the holy grail that we're looking for. Jenneke, I'm really interested to know, is there going to be a sequel to the DigiRec project? And if so, could you tell us a bit more, and also explore a bit what aims could be possible, what goals you could have?
Yes, thank you, Herman. There will be a sequel. We're going from DigiRec to DigiNet. And DigiNet stands for Digital Innovations in Credential Evaluation in the Network, so the INIC-NARIC networks. And what we will do is actually twofold. So the white paper formulated recommendations for INIC-NARIC centers and also for the network. So we're going to take that further. We're going to work with 8 INIC-NARIC centers to really focus on implementing digital solutions. And we'll be doing that by looking at each other as well. So there will be peer learning, and together we're going to take that further. And then there's the other part where we're going to discuss with the networks how to address things that need to be solved at network level, such as common standards, and also finding out how we can connect to trusted sources, because that could really help us into further automating the credential evaluation process. So that's what we're going to do in DigiNet. At the same time, I also would really like to highlight that this is not only, we're really hoping that DigiRec, the white paper, will be used beyond the DigiNet project, also by other stakeholders that have a stake in this. For example, within the Bologna process, that the working groups there will use this. And that we can really take this further, because there are a lot of different actors involved here that need to bring this further.
Yeah, and are you in any way limited to the INIC-NARIC network, or since we have now reached out to the Asian region, is there any way that the Asian region, the world, could benefit from DigiRec? Is there any limitation on the what DigiRec and DigiNet try to accomplish?
No, thank you actually for highlighting this, because it's not, everyone can use this. And I think what's actually the beauty of this project in comparison to other recognition projects, yes, it's created in the ENIC space, but the recommendations and the findings, I think, are very transferable to other regions as well. As for the implementation, that might be different because you're dealing with different structures, but the findings, we really looked also from what do credential evaluators find at their desk, what is the implication for the credential evaluation process. That might be very similar between regions, so it's definitely, I think, interesting and useful for other regions. And I would also welcome to discuss with others, other regions, to see how we further can collaborate.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. That's clear. Is there, Darren? You are moderating all the same. So I would now want to ask a question to Zheng Wei.
Absolutely.
Zheng Wei, you may not be surprised, but after my question to Jenneke about the DigiRec and DigiNet pilots projects, which are very important, I wonder the work that you are doing with Singapore and the Netherlands. Is there any vision on how to scale this up? Is that also some of the what do you call the goals that you could have? Could you please elaborate a bit?
100%, because the pilot project is to really show people how it can be done. But the fact is that what we have planned and what we have created is something that is extremely scalable. Based on an open framework, open protocols, open standard, anybody can come on board. So that is opposed to the traditional centralized system where you have to have a buy-in and somebody can say, are you in or are you out? Based on open standards, it's almost like the internet, right? Anybody that speaks the same language can be on board the same program. So for example, today we have Netherlands and Singapore. Tomorrow we can set up the same thing in Indonesia, and the entire Indonesia will be connected to both Netherlands and Singapore. And then the next day we can have something in Belgium, and then Belgium will be connected to all the other countries. So the beauty of open standards and open network is that it's highly scalable, extremely cheap to come on board, and nobody can stop you. Which of course opens up another problem, which I think was asked by one of the audience in YouTube, that the fundamental challenge that I think we will face in this kind of model is that we still need a certain level of governance, right? Otherwise, we will be susceptible to people like the degree mills, where if they can come on board on the open network and then as a legitimate school, I might be recognizing a non-legitimate school. So the way we kind of solve this is through a hybrid model between an open network as well as a governed one. We have an open network in the technical point of view, but within each country, they will have, from a business point of view, a registry of legitimate schools. So you don't have to go through the technical hassle of onboarding someone individually, but you can go through the business hassle of onboarding this as a legitimate business.
Yeah,
and with that balance itself is what I feel could be good. What do you think, Carmen?
Yeah, I'm very happy with what you say there, because we too in the Groningen Declaration Network have felt that somehow in order for this ecosystem to come alive and to further the acceptability of digital credentials, basically what you might want to have is a federation, so that you would know these are trusted sources that we can rely on. We have that already in the educational sphere, like EduRoam. It's doable, it's possible, but there should be the political and administrative will to do that. It's not a technological question, really. But well, very happy to hear that, Zheng Wei. And I tried to accommodate Darren as much as I can by welcoming also questions coming from the audience. But now I would like to turn to Simone. Could you arrange that, Darren, please? Oh, well, okay, there we go. Well, Simone, I know that Digitary actually started out to serve notaries public way back in 2005 because I was contacted through the Apostille Convention on Digitary, and this also explains the suffix "tary." But now I have my question. Now that digital credentials are increasingly becoming the norm, or at least we hope so, what impact could they have in the legal and administrative sphere? And could you think of any hurdles or obstacles? For instance, would there still be a need for rubber stamping diplomas and credentials and attaching apostilles if recipients can check their applicants' credentials right away and not just check correctness of learning data, but even go beyond that and authenticate the identity of the bearer? Would you have any comment there?
Thank you, Herman. To some extent, I think we're shifting a set of problems with a different set of problems, or let's call them challenges. Even when you bring about digital technologies, there are opportunities clearly for streamlining procedures, and I think those are the most visible benefits. But issues around security, ensuring that everyone can be on that journey, so to not leave anyone behind, those are issues that need to be addressed. If we look at the apostille level, typically those notarization effect did happen at document level. So there's a stamp for the whole document. Now, the power of digital credentials, and particularly data, is that you can really look at discrete data points and be able to certify those. Or in some cases, you may only need to disclose one specific attribute of a document, maybe your GPA, maybe the name of your institutions, maybe a learning outcome. And that is by not necessarily revealing any other personal information. And so digital technologies, particularly digital credential technologies, are really investigating how to create user experiences that make it very easy for the users who are in control to be able to share discrete data points in a way that is secure and is verifiable. Those are things that the Apostille Convention was not able to get at. And so we are looking at a finer level of granularity when we either exchange data or verify data. And that is, what, should drive, I guess, recognition, I believe, in the future. And this is what is already available today. So possibly it's not necessarily the legal framework, that are inhibiting this, as it used to be, maybe. In fact, I think it's just practice. It may take some time to change that practice, but I would encourage everyone on this call and in the audience to really take that up as a personal mission, or as a moonshot, someone would say. But it is possible. It just takes practice. And so at Digital, we're really happy. We're really happy to take on that big challenge.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Right.
Darren, just 1 minute. What we try to achieve, I would say, is digital credentials should become a kind of legal tender, just like the dollar notes have always been. There's no need to rubber stamp a physical banknote. There's no need to rubber stamp any digital data on money. And we should do the same thing for digital credentials in order to boost lifelong learning and mobility. Correct?
Absolutely. I think it's very interesting. At the root of international education and the root of partnerships is trust. And again, we see this word coming up time and time again. I'd just like to go to the floor now. We've a very good question here from Meng Xuan Chu from Nanyang Technological University. And her question is, could you distill 2 to 3, so this is to all speakers, could you distill 2 to 3 of the most fundamental challenges that we should be aware of in digital recognition of degrees and transcripts, and how can we overcome these? So perhaps we could go back to Yannicka and see if Yannicka has any views on this.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, 2 to 3 to boil it down. What are the challenges? I would actually start with the diversity. So really looking from the credential evaluation perspective, we're talking about digitizing of data, and that would be the solution. But what we see, and we actually yesterday had a discussion in the office, is that the diversity in which digital data are offered is actually, it's more than what you see in paper formats. And this requires, for example, for credential evaluators to have knowledge of all kinds of different verification processes. And we had a discussion, this cannot really be the point of digitization. So this is a challenge, because there's, to say it very bold, you actually go from, you have a digitized paper version. So this is really a challenge. And yes, how to overcome this challenge, that's a challenge in itself, but it will not be my number 2. The challenge there is that we're dealing with very different actors, and we don't have one party who's coordinating it and is going to roll this out. So it really requires collaboration. So for example, I think that's also one of the added values of the Groningen Declaration Network, which is a network that brings together, but then you need all the other levels, so national level, higher educations, but also the admission officers in higher education institutions, and acknowledge that users are not only the students and maybe the institutions, but really also the one who have to do the credential evaluation, because they are the one who are doing recognition. And recognition is both something that's technical and involves a lot of methodology, but it's also a very practical thing. So
that leads into another question we've had, and I'm not sure if we can share this, but the question was, when it comes to implementing digitalized and verifiable credentials, what are most challenging? Is it the technical or the regulatory side of things? So I'd open that to the floor, but I think it's an important question if institutions are to proceed with this, or education systems are to proceed with this.
Yeah, I would want to say, and I try to keep it brief, but the whole idea behind the Groningen Declaration has always been essential part is the trust. It's the administrative trust and the technical trust. But the most important one is the administrative trust. And we all have to realize that this is really a transition which comes with opposition. So you try to bring in a platform of a varied group of stakeholders, not just software implementers, not just vendors, not just national government bodies, also the students themselves. Please try to ensure that you be as inclusive as you can, while advocating all the time for the necessity to serve our constituents, our citizens worldwide as best as we can.
Okay. Anyone else like to address that question, or based on their own experience?
I do have a reflection on the challenges and some of the opportunities. I think wherever there is still some legal friction, I think that's going to go away. That has gone away for the diploma supplements. That has gone away. So there is lobbying there in place, and GDN is doing a great job. But I also believe that the general governance of the equation is a factor that is super important in implementing this. That also speaks to Yannick's point on the diversity. So although there are standards, there's probably one too many. And sometimes the idea is to solve a problem. It's like, yeah, let's use a standard which is probably compelling as an approach. But what if you create another one? That you create a need, further diversity or entropy, and you need to crosswalk technically, so create that interoperability layer, which is still work. But that is being addressed at the technical level, so I don't think it's a technical issue. But I think where really is, here we're looking at an opportunity to just revolutionize the recognition profession and to technology and make it really global. So if you look at any credential evaluation agency working in the world, they are probably familiar with any education system in the world because they do the evaluation. So if it doesn't matter where you're located, means so technically you could provide recognition statements or assessments that could work and should be honored anywhere in the world, regardless of where you're based. But we know, and through the reports, that some countries or regions still point to the local agency for university to provide to get that those evaluations. But really, we could open up the market. I mean, exponential technology, digitalization, the global recognition conventions do allow this profession to really scale globally and actually survive the technological revolution that may, in a dystopian future, take away that profession altogether through leveraging artificial intelligence technologies and so on. So I think there's an opportunity that opens up with the challenge there.
Okay, just from an ASEAN perspective and implementing this within ASEAN, there's a good question from Mr. Kamal Mamat asking, should harmonization of qualifications frameworks be prioritized so as to provide the incentive for institutions and systems to digitize? So perhaps I can go to Zhengwei on that question, particularly related to the ASEAN region.
100%, because it is also related to the technical versus regulation question, because we can provide the tools for all the institutions to be digitalized and to cross-verify the credentials. But when it comes to cross-recognition, that is really non-technical. Even with the use of combination of AI and machine learning to kind of identify the gaps, okay, end of the day, I can identify the gap, let's say, between a Python lesson in Singapore and a Python lesson in US, just an example. But does that mean that the school will then conform to a certain standard? They don't, because they're all unique in their own way. They want to teach in their unique way, and they believe that they have the best method. It's like two sets of parents, and then you're trying to compare their children within the same framework. We can harmonize to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, you can't control how the parents are going to teach their children. In the same way, how an institute is going to deliver the course itself. So harmonization, I think it is a priority. I do not know how that can be done. If Yannicka, Herman, who has been in this space longer and have some insight, it will be better for them to share.
So that's a great idea. Maybe we can bring in Yannicka and possibly Herman after that. Yannicka. Hi, Yannicka, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
So the question is, should harmonization of qualifications frameworks be prioritized so as to provide an incentive for institutions and systems to digitize or to pursue digital transformation of credentials?
Okay, so I think you can look at it from two ways. One is to look at it from just procedural. Do you want to wait till everything is harmonized until you're going to do this? Probably sure. Not. And the other one is from, if you look what you need for actually for the recognition of a qualification. And when you're recognizing a qualification, you look at 5 things. You look, is the quality assured? Is the level? You look at the level of the qualification, the workload, the profile, and the learning outcomes. And I think you should look at those 5 elements when you're going to digitize. And of course, harmonization efforts can help here. So that would be my response to that. Thank you.
So the idea that they don't necessarily come consecutively, but they can run in tandem.
Indeed, yes.
Can I just add on a little bit over here, Darren?
Yeah,
I think one of the... Sure, Herman, you go ahead.
Yeah, my take, Kamal Mamet, if the focus is on what way can we best provide an incentive for institutions / systems to digitize, there's no question that harmonization is always welcome, but I believe that the building block, the primary building block, should be that a system comes in place where students can be identified, whether it's through a national authentication system or self-sovereign identity, one, and then two, also you should have a unique student identifier somehow. These things are the ones that will help students to become globally mobile. It's also something that is of direct benefit for institutions because it will help their administrative process. Once you have that in place, things can start moving. Harmonization of qualification frameworks, in a way, are like Janneke said, the requirements that you would want to have in order to be able to recognize. I'm totally in favor of harmonizing qualification frameworks, but once again, if the question is how can we boost the move to further digitize, I think we should start with the learner and put them central, like Simone said, by the way. The learner privacy is basically the selling point. I'm stopping there because we are running out of time. And we hope that the DAAD and the British Council and NAFIC can not just host this webinar, but will become ever more involved in this global effort to see to it that we finally get a lifelong learning global learner ecosystem, and that we can pull it off there.
Certainly,
Yeah, if I may,
look forward to. I'm afraid I would just like to take a final comment. Janneke has put up her hand a little bit before you, Simone, so I'll go to Janneke if that's possible.
Yes, and it's actually going a bit back in the discussion, but I feel obliged to make this remark as a National Information Center, but also as the Vice President of the ENIC-NARIC networks, that we don't really see recognition as a market as such, and the idea that we're going to make global recognition decisions for other countries, I think, is not in play, not now when it's paper, and also not when it's digitized. So I think maybe, Simone, we can talk about that another time, if I'm correctly reflecting your words. Thank you.
Yes,
okay,
thank you.
I'm afraid there's so much more to talk about here, and I'm really sorry to cut things off. It's clear that this is a nascent area in international education, and not just in ASEAN, but in Europe, and there's plenty of work to be done on this. But there's certainly a great willingness to work cohesively on it. The ability to scale seems to be a key advantage. And the fact that it's much more inclusive for institutions and also participants is very attractive. And then again, trust is at the center. So it's really about collaborating, ensuring that as many stakeholders are brought into the process and that we are able to move forward on this together. I'd like to thank all of the panelists sincerely for their efforts and their sharings today. It's been a really valuable discussion. I'd also like to extend my thanks to all those who joined the discussion on YouTube Live. Really good questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all. I'd just like to give a little bit of an overview as to what's coming up next and what's coming up next week, specifically for the policy dialogue, the Share ASEAN policy dialogue. So I wonder, could we just share the slides there, please? Perhaps no. Okay. So once again, thank you. We had a couple of technical difficulties today, and unfortunately, our original moderator, Mr. Mikael Horik, wasn't able to join us. So we're really sorry, because Mikael has really got a lot of experience in this area, and I think he would have been a better moderator than perhaps myself. But thank you also, Herman, for stepping into the breach and moderating a lot of the questions here. It seems that we're still having some technical difficulties, so I can't quite bring you the slides for the next sessions. But please do visit the Share website and you'll see the full rundown of presentations there. So once again, thanks to all the panelists, really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you at our next sessions.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.